Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and today I have another review for you. Before we get into which books I'm talking about, I mean, you probably already know because otherwise you probably wouldn't have clicked on this video. But before we get into the books and everything, I'm just gonna have to say that I am sorry for a lot of background noise in this video. It has started getting hotter and I just need to have my windows open right now, otherwise I'm gonna die of heat. So yeah, that out of the way. In today's video we are finally going to be talking about the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee, which consists of Jade City, Jade War and Jade Legacy, which came out at the end of last year, I believe. And yeah, as all of my reviews, this is going to be spoiler free, and I will start by trying to tell you a little bit about what the series is about, which we all know I'm not very good at, but I will try my best as always, and then we will get into my thoughts on this series. However, this series, in my opinion, is going to be a review that is even more subjective than my usual reviews, because Fonda Lee is one of those authors who does things and who does things differently and who brings something new into the fantasy genre. However, that also means that, you know, some of the things she does might be quite controversial. Well, not controversial, maybe polarizing is the right word, and you might like it or you might not like it. And so with a lot of the negative things that I will talk about in this review, those aren't really negative things where I would say those are not well done things, but more so things that just, you know, weren't really my cup of tea. And well, actually the same doesn't go for the positive things, because the positive things I just think are great. They might not work for everyone, but I do think they are great. So yeah, but first let's talk what the series is about. This is a high fantasy, however, not the type of high fantasy that you might automatically picture when someone tells you a series is high fantasy. Actually, originally I thought this was science fiction, which was due to the covers, to be honest. I don't know, it just felt like very laser-y. But this is high fantasy that is set in a quite modern urban fantasy type setting. This series, I would say, is very strongly inspired by the Cold War period of our world. However, we are set in an Asian or Eastern Asian inspired setting, and not necessarily in one of the places that's, you know, one of the great powers of this Cold War that is going on in this world, but one of the other players that kind of has to deal with these huge economies fighting each other. But that is kind of the background plot, I would say, of this series. The main plot is a mafia fantasy. In a way, this series, I believe Fonda Lee said that the main country is, or the main city this is set in, is mostly inspired by Shanghai. I might be wrong about that. And in the city you have different clans of people, and the people in those clans can use something called bioenergetic jade to kind of optimize their physical and mental powers. And of course the clans within the city aren't necessarily always at peace with each other, so in front of the backdrop of this kind of Cold War type world building, you have clan wars that are being fought, and that is the main plot of the series. I feel like I made the plot way more confusing than was necessary, but anyway, let's get into my thoughts on this series. So the first thing I want to say is that this is one of the most exhausting series that I have ever read, which does not make it a bad series. It's actually quite a compliment, but I think I talked about it in my last review I did, which was of A Chorus of Dragons, where I talked about how nice it was to have a fantasy series where I don't have to constantly worry about all the characters. This was not the type of series. This is the type of series where you're constantly kept on your toes, where you constantly feel anxious about every single decision every single character makes, because you're worried that something's gonna happen. And then even if there's not any imminent decisions that the characters made, quite often something happens just like this out of nowhere, and you know, the whole game changes, which is quite exciting when you read it, because there literally is not a boring chapter in any of these books. However, it does also make the books quite exhausting to read because, as I said, you're constantly anxious, and I actually had to take a break between the books always, especially with the second book, which in my opinion was the worst in terms of the anxiety I had while reading it. I just literally had to take a break from the series because I just couldn't handle going into the third book right away. Also, it did take me a few months to finish the third book because this was one of those series where I really had to be in the right mind to read it. And just after I started the third book, my grandmother died. And so, you know, when you're feeling down already and not your best, this is maybe not the series that I would recommend. So first with the negative things, I guess, or the things I didn't enjoy that much about the series, which both had to do, I have two things, both had to do with the last book. First of all, I found that in the last book we had quite a few quite big time jumps, and then at the same time we didn't spend enough time at single points in time. For example, sometimes something big would happen and then 2 chapters later we were already a year later and we didn't really have time to properly deal with all the fallout from what just happened. So that's something that I wasn't necessarily a fan of. On the other hand, to do with the same thing, this series is not a series where we just deal with like a few months or a year. This is a series that literally spans decades. And I just love those series because you can really see things play out, and especially with political fantasy, which I would certainly put this in the subgenre of political fantasy, it's just way better if you have a longer time span because, you know, political stuff takes time to set up and then to pay off. But the second negative thing that I had was, I guess for me, the emotional fallout of the finale of this book didn't really pay off. I know that I saw a lot of people who absolutely loved the final book and got everything they wanted from this final book. I just wanted to have this mentioned here because I feel like I'm digging on the final book right now, which I absolutely do not want to because overall this was still a 4.5 stars for me. But the emotional fallout for me was just not really there. First of all, because of the big time jumps, or not the big time jumps, the many time jumps that we had in this book. And then also because there were a lot of elements, especially a lot of emotional elements within this book that I expected to happen. And so because of that, they kind of hit me less. So yeah, that was just another thing where just for me personally, the finale fell flat. However, on the political side, the plot side of things, this finale absolutely did not fall flat for me because during most of this book there were still so many plot threads open that I was like, how is Funnily gonna manage to satisfyingly tie all of these plot threads together? And she absolutely did. Like, she 100% absolutely did. She managed to take everything, even the things that she only opened up in this book, and just tie everything into a perfectly neat little bow. So yeah, emotionally this book didn't quite hit me as much as I would have liked, although that might also be because while I did really enjoy the characters and found them very interesting, I feel like I wasn't as emotionally connected to them as a lot of other readers were, especially one of the characters who I'll get to later on. But yeah, in terms of just, you know, the intellectual tying up of this book, it just was perfect. Since I was already mentioning it, let's talk about characters next. This is definitely one of those series where all the characters mostly are in the anti-hero category. There is one character who, at least at the beginning of the books, is very much a cinnamon roll. I love Andon so much. But in terms of other characters, I think one of the big reasons why I didn't connect with these books as much on an emotional level as a lot of other readers did is because one of the main characters, Hilo, I did not love as much as everyone else did. I actually kind of hated him for the entire first book and most of the second book, maybe all of the second book. I don't remember anymore, and I only really got to appreciate him in the last book. But even with the characters I did not like, there was not a single character in this series that I found boring. And it's just really nice because you have a lot of very different characters in this series. I mean, most characters that you see a lot from are characters that are part of one specific Greenbone clan, so one of the mafia clans. However, within that clan you get to see POVs from very different characters, most of them within the leading family, but their backgrounds and why they do what they do, their motivations are very different. So I did enjoy that, and I also just enjoyed the grimdark aspect. I think this is one of those series that does anti-heroes really well. I mean, I'm not even sure if I would call them anti-heroes, because, you know, anti-heroes are protagonists who do the right thing for the wrong reasons. I'm not necessarily sure if they ever do the right thing. I mean, they do the right thing for themselves, but they rarely act for the greater good. So, you know, anti-hero might not even be a good term for them. But generally speaking, I just thought the characters were really well done, really interesting, really different, and had a lot of depth. Like, I understood the motivations of pretty much every single character within the series, which, when they went head to head, made it sometimes quite difficult to read because, you know, you understand where everyone is coming from. So the last thing I want to say about the series is talking about the world building and the politics and so on. And then also, I'm kind of scared of gushing about this because, first of all, it might make me seem dull, and second of all, it might make you not want to pick up the series. But this series is a series that I would almost call economic fantasy. Because, as I said, the political situation that is the backdrop of the series very much is Cold War inspired. And by the way, I love the way the country was done. That was basically the US. And, you know, how a lot of commentary was made about the politics of the US, about US imperialism and so on. But because this is very Cold War inspired, there's also a big part in the series, and a big part of the politics in the series is economics. And I know economics is like a term that a lot of people think comes with a lot of very boring stuff, which is sometimes true, but it's not always true. And it's definitely not done in this series in a way where I feel like you need a lot of pre-knowledge already of how economics work to understand why the characters are doing in the series what they're doing for economic reasons and so on. But I just absolutely loved it. Okay, I might also be an economics student, so maybe that might have something to do with it, but it's so good, and economics just don't have enough space in fantasy as it is, so it was just very enjoyable to see, like, all of that pulled into the series and how it was dealt with and so on. It just, it made my little student heart beat faster, and this time not for anthropologist reasons, but for economics reasons, so that was very nice. And yeah, I think that was already kind of the main things that I had to say about this series. I thought the writing was, once again, good. This was not really the type of writing where I particularly noticed the writing, so don't really have that much to say on that front. And yeah, the main things for me in this series really were, on the one hand, the characters, then the absolute anxiety-inducing tension that was there just all the time in this series, and lastly, the world building with the focus on economics. It wasn't even a focus on economics. I just noticed that there was a lot of economics, and, you know, the politics were just like this with the economics, and it was just really, really nice. And also something I found very interesting is that for this being kind of marketed as a mafia type fantasy, there was not like an overindulgence of action and gore and brutality. I mean, it got quite brutal at times, but I thought there was a really good balance in the series between, you know, politics and tension there, between family life, family drama, personal stuff going on with the characters that we're following, and then also every now and again action happening. And I just thought that balance was struck really, really well in this series. And so yeah, with all of that said, if you have read the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee, tell me your thoughts on this series in the comments down below. If you haven't read it, tell me if you want to pick it up now, or if I scared you away with my gushing about the economics in this book. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media, as well as to my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, where I read one adult high fantasy book written by a woman or genderqueer person per month, will be left linked down below. That book club is actually where we read all 3 of these books, so yeah, definitely go and check it out. The Discord and Twitter are down below. And with all of that said, I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!